Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned with the book of the week. It's time to talk about the book of the week, and the book for this week is The Weird. It's The Weird. Edited by Ann and Jeff VanderMeer, this massive collection of weird horror stories was published in 2011. I think it was 2011 when this was published. It was way back when, Roger, in the olden days of 2011. And it is a gigantic anthology of weird horror stories. Ann and Jeff VanderMeer have done some really good anthologies. Jeff VanderMeer is probably still best known for the Area X trilogy, probably, although he's written a lot of stuff. This is very impressive, and I've always really liked this book. This anthology of weird horror stories, the type of horror stories which are odd and strange and occasionally cosmic. They frequently do not have the typical trappings of horror stories like ghosts and werewolves and vampires, although sometimes they do. There are ghosts in this volume, for example. As it says on the back, exotic and esoteric. The weird plunges you into dark domains and brings you face to face with surreal monstrosities. You won't find any elves or wizards here. That's actually not entirely true. But you will find the biggest, boldest, and downright most peculiar stories from the last 100 years, bound together in the biggest weird collection ever assembled. I don't know if it's still the biggest weird collection ever assembled, but it's pretty gigantic. It's about 1,100 pages long, and the pages are double columned. So this is one of those massive double columned phone book sized anthologies that you saw published for a while, and still occasionally do, I guess. But yeah, it's pretty great. It's pretty great. There are a couple things about it that are not great, but it's mostly great. And it does cover about 100 years of horror stories in here. It starts off in 1908. Let me see. Yeah, with an excerpt from The Other Side by Alfred Kubin from 1908. And then the last story in here is Saving the Gleeful Horse from 2010 by K.J. Bishop. So, yeah, 100 years worth of stories, and it has just about every weird fiction author you could think of, with a couple notable exceptions. There were a couple authors that absolutely should be in this volume and inexplicably are not. Probably the most striking omission is there's not a story by Arthur Machen in here. And Arthur Machen is one of the most important writers of weird fiction ever, certainly one of the most influential. So no Great God Pan in here. The White People, one of the greatest weird stories of all time, should at least be in this volume, but it's not. And there's no Richard Matheson in here either. Maybe they thought that he wasn't weird enough, but they have Stephen King in here, and you wouldn't even have a Stephen King without a Richard Matheson, probably. But just about everybody else is in here as far as weird fiction is concerned. You've got, let me get to the title page, if I can get to it. I mean, you start off with The Screaming Skull as the second story from F. Marion Crawford. And then you do have The Willows by Algernon Blackwood, which is considered by many, including H.P. Lovecraft, to be the weirdest or the greatest weird story ever written. And it still might be. I can't think of a better one, really, than The Willows. But let me know if you think there's a weird story better than that one, but probably not. Then we have Casting the Ruins in here by M.R. James, so there's a ghost story right there. So M.R. James was included. Lord Dunsany is in here, so that's appropriate. We've got The People of the Pit by A. Merritt, so that's excellent. That's an excellent story. So Merritt's in here. Of course, we've got Lovecraft. The the story they chose for Lovecraft is the Dunwich Horror, with a wizard. We do have, technically he was a wizard, old Wizard Whately. They called him that anyway. The Dunwich Horror, which owes a lot to Arthur Machen, who's not in this book, is a great story. I'm not sure it's the one I would have chose. I don't know that it's the weirdest story that Lovecraft wrote. But it is pretty good story, so, no complaints there. Really. The Night Wire in here from 1926 by H.F. Arnold. That's an excellent story. We've got a story that is worth the price of admission, by itself. Far Below from 1939 by Robert Barber Johnson is in here. And that is a hell of a story. And you will find it in other anthologies here and there. But it's fantastic. That's such a great story. We've got Smoke Ghost from Fritz Leiber in here. And of course, we've got Kafka's in here as well. Of course, Clark Ashton Smith is in here. Ray Bradbury's in here with The Crowd, which is a story that has been anthologized to death. So I'm not sure that's the one I would have put in here. I mean, it's a good story, but you've probably read it a dozen times already. And God, we've got so many other authors in here because of course you've got room for them. We've got who else is in here? We've got Robert Bloch, of course, with The Hungry House. Jerome Bixby with It's a Good Life from 1953. What else do we have? So many stories. Robert Aikman's in here with The Hospice from 1975. George R.R. Martin is in here with Sand Kings from 1979. Again, a story that has been anthologized to death, but it's a really good story. There's a reason that's been reprinted over and over again. I'm not sure it's the weirdest story in the world. They probably put it in here just because George R.R. Martin wrote it. But, it's a pretty good story. But another story that's worth the price of admission is The Autopsy by Michael Shea from 1980. Man, that's a good story. The Autopsy. That story is great. And this is where I first read it. There was some Netflix show whose title I'm forgetting that recently did a version of that was excellent. But the original story's in here, and it's fantastic. And that follows The Brood by Ramsey Campbell. So Ramsey Campbell's in here. F. Paul Wilson is in here with Soft from 1984. Another story that you see around a lot. Good story. Octavia E. Butler's in here with Bloodchild from 1984. Clive Barker is in here with In the Hills, the Cities. Another story, I think, is reprinted a lot, I think. That's an excellent story, though. Joyce Carol Oates is in here with Family. Poppy Z. Bright's in here with His Mouth Will Taste of Wormwood from 1990. Lisa Tuttle's in here with Replacements from 1992. The Stephen King story in here is from 94, The Man in the Black Suit. Caitlin R. Kiernan's in here. Michael Chabon's in here. China Mayville's in here. Neil Gaiman's in here. Thomas Ligotti is in here with The Town Mangler, or The Town Manager, The Town Mangler. That's actually a pretty good title. They should have called the story that. The Town Manager from 2003. Laird Barron's in here with The Forest. So this is a pretty impressive anthology, and it's got a Four Weird by Michael Moorcock, right? He does the Four Weird. Let me see. Yeah, Four Weird is by Michael Moorcock. And then Ann and Jeff VanderMeer do the introduction. And there's an afterword by China Mayville. But, yeah, I mean, and of course, I just mentioned a few. I mean, this thing is massive. And so it's one of those anthologies that will take a while to read. It'd take a while to read this. I can't remember how long it took me to read this because I read this back in 2012 or whenever I bought it. which was long before I was on BookTube, and I paid absolutely no attention to how long it took me to read things. Back in the day when I didn't care how long it took me to read a book, because, who cared? It wasn't like I was telling anybody about it. But it might take a while to read this book, and I often think of picking this back up and reading it once again. I might do it someday when I've retired from BookTube and don't care how long it takes me to read a book. Yeah, but it's excellent. Little author, little author biographies before every story. It's great. So yes, The Weird, still available, I think. I think you can still get your hands on this. Pretty sure. And I do recommend it very highly. I mean, as a collection of horror stories, it's great. I love horror anthologies. I just love them. Horror anthologies, science fiction anthologies, I think they're wonderful. And this is a pretty impressive one. So there you go. That is your book of the week, The Weird. Okay, guys, we'll catch you next time.